first of all, it's very interesting to reflect that historically the concept of an MS prodrome was largely dismissed in the early literature. So if you go back and look at some of the textbooks that were in press through until the year 2000, so not so long ago, they dismissed this concept of a prodrome, but didn't actually give any evidence either way, which I think is a real shame, because in contrast, other prodromal phases were already being recognized in other neurological diseases such as Parkinson's disease. So my team, and now others as well, have gone out to see if we can actually measure this prodromal phase. And by the prodrome, I mean early signs and symptoms of a condition that occur before our classical understanding of onset of that disease. So a classical onset of MS might be something like an optic neuritis. So we're looking at the years leading up to MS onset, something like optic neuritis. And I think what's really emerged recently, and some of the work that we're presenting at ECTRIMS this year in Milan, is looking at how far back in time can we actually measure this MS prodrome. And we're measuring it by looking at healthcare use. We are measuring healthcare use in terms of hospitalizations, physician visits, prescriptions filled at outpatient community pharmacies in the years leading up to MS onset relative to matched general population controls. And I think some of the exciting findings that have come to light recently, whereas previously we could measure a difference in this health service use 5 years before MS onset, we're now going back further in time, 10 and possibly up to 15 years before MS onset. We're finding that people who went on to develop MS were more likely to, for example, visit a physician for any reason in those years leading up to MS onset. We looked at physician visit rates up to 15 years before MS onset. Specifically, actually, it was before a first demyelinating event. And we actually did this in 2 regions. We did it in Sweden using the Swedish MS registries, and we did it in Canada in the province of Ontario. So I think it was really interesting to see that up to 15 years before MS onset, we could see higher rates of visits to physicians. We also looked at differences by age and sex, and we could see that there were differences by age and sex, which I think shows us that the MS prodromal phase may be quite extensive, may extend many years before MS onset. It also differs by the demographics of our MS cases, our MS population. And so moving forward, we want to see if we can phenotype that prodromal phase in more depth. So meaning we want to look at why people were visiting a physician or accessing the health system. But it's exciting to do this study in such a large cohort of individuals. We had over 46,000 MS cases and over 190,000 matched general population controls. And again, that was international studies spanning both Sweden and Canada.